What's up creators, I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to try to replicate the style of Estherscanon. As always, this video was a suggestion by one of you guys in the comment section on a previous video. So if you have any video that you want me to make or style in particular that you want me to replicate, don't hesitate to put it down in the comment section and I'll slowly check them out. Now, you know how this works. First of all, we're going to check out some example images shot by her so we can break down what she does in terms of exposure and contrast and in terms of color grading. So when we jump into Lightroom, we know what to do when we edit a photo and create some presets out of it. So creators, here we have Esther's profile, or Estherscanon if you want to go and follow her. I don't know how to pronounce it. But right here you can see that she's a wedding photographer or a couples photographer from California, and most of the images are shot in either golden hour, on an overcast day, or in situations where there's very soft lighting. So this is a key to achieving her style. She's going for a very soft style, and you can see it in the time of day where she's shooting. There are a couple of examples, of course, where she's shooting at midday when a bright sunny day, but most of them are shot at sundown. Okay, so let's start breaking down her style, starting out with the exposure and contrast. So what I can see from her style is that the exposure and contrast are very flat. What I mean by this is that she's reducing a bit of the intensity of the bright areas on her image and then increasing the amount of detail in the shadow areas, basically leveling the field of the contrast so it's not too punchy. And right here in this image, we can see that exactly. This image is completely backlit. Well, our subjects are backlit. Therefore, this dark area or the shadow area which we are seeing should be very contrasty and very punchy. We shouldn't be able to see so much detail in her jacket, neither in the shadows of the trees in the background. So this is a clear indication that she's raising up the shadows and the blacks either in the basic corrections or in the tone curve. So that's happening in the shadows, but what's happening in the bright areas on the image? Right here you can see this is one of the rare images that she has in a bright sunny day. This image is very opaque. It's very dark for it to be in midday. What she's doing is probably underexposing on field, so we don't have any overexposure, but also notice how the highlights or any bright area on the image, in particular the dress of her, doesn't have a single bit of overexposure. There's no pure whites in her images. She's basically reducing the whites, reducing the highlights, so we don't have any clipping, any overexposure, and therefore we have a very opaque looking image. Now that we're here, we also have harsh contrast because it's a bright sunny day, and areas which should be black, very intense black, like the shadows that both of the subjects are protecting. Notice how, well, they're not blacks, they're basically grayed out. And this is telling us that she's basically fading them out in the tone curve. So we have to keep that in mind. So when we jump into Lightroom, we can replicate this. So that's in terms of the contrast. What is she doing in terms of the color grading? Now, her color palette is very natural. She doesn't mess around with the skin tones. There's no weird color shift or anything like that. Maybe the greens are a bit towards the yellow side. And also, as we saw in the previous image, our sky is a bit towards the aquas and a bit desaturated. So those are the hues that maybe she's shifting just a bit, but in general, her color palette is very normal. Now, what isn't normal is that all of her images, independently if it's a sunset, if it's an overcast day, they're completely warm. She's adding a lot of warmth into them, and probably she's doing this in the global color wheel in color grading, but it's a strange kind of yellow orangey tint because it's being mixed with a bit of green in the shadows. Pay attention to the dark areas of the image. Yes, they're yellowish and very warm, but also they have a slight green tint, and this is giving us this very unique color grading. Actually, it's not so unique because we already analyzed the style which was very similar, which is Hannah Kuttner. If you want to watch the video, check it out on the channel, but it's a very similar style in terms of the hue that she's adding. Now, when we have images like this one, which are already very green, and by adding more warmth, more green with the editing, we're creating this mesh of green, which is very accentuated, and one could think that you're pushing the saturation of the greens, but they're not. The greens are very natural. It's just the color grading or the tint that we're adding on top of it. Now, one straight giveaway that she's adding something in the color grading is looking at any part of the image which is neutral, either something white, gray, or black. And in this case, the dress of our central model over here. Notice how it's a white dress, obviously, but we can see it with that warm green tint. And there we have our confirmation that she's adding those tones in the color grading. Now, another key aspect on her style is all the grittiness that's being added by all the film grain. Now, this isn't natural film grain. This is added in post-edition, and it's a very rugged, very big grain, which is taking away a bit of the sharpness on the image, but also adding some texture and making these images look a bit vintage. Combined with the warmth, they basically look sepia. So just to keep that in mind when we jump into the effects in Lightroom. Now this is the main style that dominates most of her feed, but she does have a little variant, which is the black and white version. And this is nothing else than just stripping away the colors of her style to create the black and white variant. We have that softness in the light, we have that texture from the grain, those faded out blacks. Actually, the blacks are a bit more raised, a bit more faded than in the colored version, but it's a very simple process, and we're going to create this variant as well in this video. So creators, enough for the analysis. Now let's jump into Lightroom and start editing. But before that, I'm going to remind you that the two presets that we're going to create today are already included in the Edit preset pack V4. Link up here in case you want to check it out. In the Edit V4, you're going to find all the presets from the Edit series of this season. So all the styles that we replicated in this year and that we're going to replicate throughout the year are going to be in that pack. So that's a great way you can skip my tutorials, but in the process you can support me. Also, just browse around my shop, maybe you find some of my personal presets or personal LUTs helpful so you can edit in a faster manner. I use them every single day to edit my photos or my videos just like this one and just cut the times. So maybe something over there helps you out, and in the process you can support me, and I'll be very thankful if you can. And if you can't, don't worry guys, let's jump into Lightroom and start editing. So creators, here I am in Lightroom Classic. Don't worry if you're using another version of Lightroom, it's exactly the same process. So I'm going to select, I think, this image, and with D on my keyboard, I'm going to shift into my develop module. Okay, starting out, what we want to do is achieve the flat exposure and contrast. And for that, we're going to use the basic corrections and the tone curve. And then further along, we can move into the color grading tools. Okay, starting out with the basic corrections, the highlights. Now, highlights will control the bright areas in our image, like the shoe, like the skin, for example, right here. What we want to do is not bring in towards the positives, otherwise we introduce more contrast and we start to lose a lot of information there. We want to go towards the negatives. Now, not towards the extreme, otherwise our image is very opaque, but maybe around the -20s, -25s is going to be a good value. Yeah, something around those lines. Then shadows, we're not going to copy what we did in the highlights, because if we bring it down, we'll lose information. What we want to do is bring more detail into dark areas of the image. And by moving these layers around, you can start to see what Lightroom classifies as shadows. And you can see it's everything from the trees in the background, even to the grass. So what we're going to do is just push it up just a bit. We're on the +35s maybe. So we bring a bit more information into the dark areas on the image. Just a little note guys, I can bring back so much information in this file because it's a raw file or a DNG. DNGs and RAWs are created for post edition. So make sure that you're editing a raw file. For example, right here, I have ARW, which is just the Sony version of raw files. But if you're editing JPEGs, PNGs, or any other type of file, you won't be able to push these sliders a lot because artifacts will start to appear. So if you haven't already guys, jump into your camera and select raw files or DNG files as the output file. Okay, now we're going to leave the basic corrections for a while. I'm going to jump into the tone curve, and right here we're going to make some quite interesting changes. The tone curve controls our exposure and contrast, and this point at the top right corner controls our whites, and I'm not going to drag it towards the left, otherwise we introduce more brightness, but rather towards the bottom. Not too much, otherwise, well, we basically get rid of all the brightness in our image, but maybe just a little bit, maybe around the 238 in the output, which is nothing but the y-axis coordinates. And what we're doing right here is ensuring that we're not going to have any pure whites. You can see the difference right here, how our whites are a little bit more opaque. Now, by doing this movement, we're basically making sure that even if you take a photo of the sun, it's not going to be pure white. It's going to be a bit dimmed down. And this is exactly what we want. We don't want any clipping. We don't want any pure whites in our image. Now, opposite to that, the blacks, we don't want any pure blacks as well. We want them to be grayed out. So this point at the bottom left corner will control the blacks. Towards the right, we'll introduce more intensity. And upwards, as you can see, our blacks start to fade away into a grayish tone. Now, this is extreme, but I'm going to drag it maybe around 20 in the output. Input is going to be 0 because I didn't move it towards the right or towards the left. And right now our blacks, as you can see, they're very faded out. You can see the difference right here in comparison to the original image. And basically our blacks are grays. They're not pure blacks like the interface of Lightroom. So here we can see what the tone curve has done. It's just making our image a lot more flat. Now the problem is that by moving these points around, we're not only affecting the blacks and the whites, this being a continuous line, we're also affecting other areas of the image, the midtones, the highlights, and in particular the shadows. So we're losing a lot of the shadows over here. So what I'm going to do is create a point in the tone curve. I'm going to drag it just to the diagonal, this black line that we have as a starting reference. I'm just going to drag it over here, so we preserve our shadows as we wanted them in the basic corrections. Input's going to be 50, output is going to be 50, just in the middle of the diagonal. And what we're doing right here is preserving our shadows as we apply them in the basic corrections. Now, as a consequence to that, we are having our faded blacks, but notice how our midtones and also our highlights are below the diagonal, just a bit more opaque than usual, but this is okay. This is exactly what we wanted. You can see the before and after, how we're doing. Our image is looking quite nice. Very flat, not too punchy, not too contrasty. Now, something that occurs when we fade out the blacks so intensely in the tone curve is that our image becomes very soft and we lose a lot of the strength in the dark areas. So what I'm going to do is just return a bit of the strength by moving the black slider towards the negatives just a bit, around the -15. So our blacks are still present in the image, but they're not completely there. Notice the difference compared to the original image, how our blacks are still retaining the grayish tone that we added in the tone curve. So that's it for the exposure and contrast. Now let's move down into the colors, and we're going to go straight into color grading to add that warmth and that green cast that we saw in all the example images. So right here we can add a tint and some saturation into the shadows, to the midtones, or into the highlights, but in this case I'm going to go all the way to the right to the global color wheel. Right here we can add some saturation. I'm going to play around until find the hue that I want. You guys can play around, of course. These values are going to be just my interpretation. The hue I think is going to be this one, a very beautiful yellow, quite golden, 54, and the saturation I'm just going to reduce it, of course. I would be tempted to go around the 32 just to have a more dramatic effect, but I like to make these presets more neutral, a bit more dimmed down, so you guys can apply them into different types of images. So I'm going to go with a 25, but just a little caveat, you guys can play around, maybe push it all the way to the +35 in the saturation. So right here we have the warmth. The difference compared to the original image is very clear, but we are missing the green because this is just yellow added to the image. We're going to add that green, and I'm going to add it in the shadow wheel over here. Now, I'm not going to add it into the midtones because, well, this preset is created for portraits, and normally when you're shooting a person, you're trying to expose towards their skin, so everything is completely well exposed. Therefore, it's going to be in the midtones. So I'm going to go to the shadows, and right here where we don't have any skin, or normally we don't have any skin or faces of our models, I'm just going to find the hue that I want, and I think it's going to be this one, 87 in the hue, and the saturation I'm going to reduce it, maybe around the 20 is going to be enough. We can see what this color wheel has done by selecting or pressing down this little eye over here. This is before, and we have a very warm image, and after, now have that combination of that warmth with the green tone in the shadows. Now in this image in particular, notice how our greens become a lot more saturated, and that's basically just because we're combining the greens from the shadows with the already existing greens from the image, which is exactly what happens in Esther's images on Instagram. Okay, so that's it for color grading. Now let's move into color mixer and fine tune some of the tones. So here in color mixer, you're going to go into mixer and then HSL, and we're going to start off with the blues. When there was a bit of blue in the image, it was tending slightly towards the aqua tones and a bit more desaturated and opaque. So the blue slider here in hue, I'm just going to move it towards the negatives, not too much, otherwise this is completely ridiculous, but ever so slightly, maybe around the -10, just to push it a bit more towards the aquas. Then saturation, we don't want it to be too relevant. We want the warm tones in the image to take more presence. So I'm just going to drag it again towards the negatives, maybe around the -20. And also the aquas ever so slightly around the -10. And then finally in luminance, we're going to darken a bit of the sky. Not too much, otherwise this is completely unnatural, but ever so slightly around the -10, -8 is going to be the value. Just darkening a bit of the sky so we can see the before and after, just slight changes into the sky. And another thing that we can do over here is just push a bit more saturation into the greens. Now the vegetation on my image is controlled mostly, yes, by the greens, but also by the yellow slider over here. So I'm going to push both of these around the +10 towards the positives in the saturation, just to make them a bit more emphatic and colorful. Now finally, let's finish off this preset with the grain. So grain is all the way down in the effects tab, and right here you can push some vignette. I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to use some grain. I'm going to add it to the +100 just to see the size, and now we can play around with the size. And I think I'm going to go with a very big grain, maybe all the way to the +100 over here. Quite rough. Now we can reduce a bit of the amount, so it's not too intense, too distracting. Something around these values, 35. But the problem right here that I'm having is that our grain, well, it's composed by black and white particles, as you can see. They're a bit too punchy, too dramatic. So what I can do is reduce the roughness, not push it towards the positives, otherwise they become a lot more contrasty, but maybe a bit towards the negatives, just ever so slightly, -40, just to reduce a bit of the contrast between the particles so it's not that distracting. Guys, remember to play around with the values, in particular with grain, because grain is not an intelligent tool. It doesn't scale the values depending on the resolution of your file. For example, right here, I'm introducing these values into an image shot with a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor. Here's the resolution. But maybe if I apply these same settings into an image shot with a full frame sensor, the grain looks a bit too small. So always play around and adjust the values accordingly to the resolution of your files. So our color grading is looking fantastic, very dramatic, very similar to Esther, but we can't cry victory just yet. We need to test these settings in other images before we save the preset, just to make sure that it isn't a one-off case, that these settings look well in this one image and not in any others. So I'm gonna right click, settings, copy settings, and then I'm gonna move into other images just to test them out. How about in this image of myself in the forest in an overcast day? I think it would work perfectly. Right click and paste settings, and it looks very nice. Our whites are a lot more controlled, our blacks are faded out, we have loads of detail in the shadows, and that very nice warm green cast added through the entire image, and that very nice grain. How about in this one? Right click, paste settings. It looks very nice. We can see the before and after. Notice the difference in the trees, in the shadows, how we have loads more information, and those blacks are now faded out. Skin tones look very nice. We didn't mess around with the oranges and the reds, so they should work perfectly. We have that very nice warm cast that Esther adds into her images. So this preset is basically complete. Now we can go ahead and save it. Go to the left panel over here. In the preset panel, hit the plus sign, create preset. Here, remember to name it. And I don't want to mark anything that we didn't use, just mark everything that you did use. And in particular, 3 values that I like to omit is white balance, exposure, and contrast, because I like to use these to compensate if my image was poorly shot on field. So for example, as you can see, this image over here, if I go all the way to the top, I shot it underexposed and I corrected it before starting editing. So this is how our image looked originally. But right here, I can go ahead and add more contrast, add more brightness, or play around with the temperature as well. Also, remember that you can play around with the preset. So right here, if I select it, you can adjust the amount to make the style a lot more intense, a lot more soft. More intense, all the values start to exponentially multiplicate, or towards the negatives, just to make the style a bit more soft in case you don't want it to be so harsh. Okay, before we go, let's create the black and white variant, and this is going to be very simple. First of all, we're going to select V on your keyboard to select the monochromatic mode. Here we change our image into black and white, but we do need to go into the color grading and reset our color wheels. We can double click them, or you can right click and reset all ranges just to eliminate all the hues that we added in color grading. Our image is pure black and white. Now you could save the preset right here, but what I observed is that some of the images in black and white were a lot more faded in terms of the blacks. The black were a lot more gray than usual. So right here, I'm just going to push in the tone curve the blacks a bit more further upwards. Up to 35, 36 is going to be the value. And now our blacks are a lot more faded out. Here we can see the abrupt difference that we're creating. The blacks on our image are basically gray compared to the interface of Lightroom. So we can go ahead and save this as another variant, hit the plus sign and create preset. So we can test out the 2 presets. This is Estherscanon and it looks very nice, very warm, very girly. But in this case, Esther does shoot a lot of models, female models and weddings. So I think it worked quite well. And then the black and white, yeah, it looks fantastic. Just a black and white version, a bit more faded out. So that's my interpretation on Estherscanon's style. A very similar style to Hannah Kuttner, weirdly, but I think we achieved the results as we wanted. And remember that these 2 presets are in the Edit Preset Pack V4. In case you want to support me, check out my shop over here. If you can purchase anything from there, I'll be very thankful, because we all know that YouTube AdSense pays next to nothing. If you can't, don't worry guys, just like the video, subscribe, all those things. I'm Tony Fuentes. Cheers to all of you, and I'll see you in the next one.